Don't talk. Black Maid's daughter saved Billionaire after she saw his son doing this. The first thing Naomi learned about rich people was that they never looked down. Not at their polished marble floors, not at their crystal decanters, and certainly not at the 17-year-old girl who dusted their antique furniture every morning at exactly 6:47 a.m. To the Hampton family and their endless parade of wealthy guests, Naomi Williams might as well have been part of the mahogany woodwork, present, functional, and utterly forgettable. Which was exactly how she preferred it. Naomi pressed herself against the grand staircase's ornate banister as Mrs. Hampton's stilettos clicked past, her phone pressed to her ear as she complained about the charity gala's flower arrangements. The woman's perfume, something that probably cost more than Naomi's mother made in 3 months, lingered in the air long after she disappeared into the morning room. Invisible again, Naomi whispered to herself, a small smile tugging at her lips. She'd perfected the art of invisibility over the years. It wasn't just about staying quiet or moving carefully, though she'd mastered both. It was about understanding the rhythm of the Hampton mansion, knowing exactly when and where to position herself so that she became part of the background. Like right now, crouched behind the Italian leather armchair in the corner of the library, she could observe the entire first floor without anyone noticing her presence. And what a show it was! "Mother, you're being dramatic as usual," came Damien Hampton's voice from the foyer. At 25, the billionaire's son had perfected the art of looking bored with everything, from his perfectly styled dark hair to his designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Father's not dying. He's just having another one of his power trips." Naomi's mother, Rosa, emerged from the kitchen carrying a silver tea service, her weathered hands steady despite the ornate tray's weight. Rosa had worked for the Hampton family for 15 years, ever since Naomi was 2 and Rosa needed a job that came with housing. The small apartment above the garage wasn't much, but it was home. "Good morning, Master Damien," Rosa said quietly, her accent barely noticeable after all these years in America. Damien didn't acknowledge her. He never did. To him, Rosa was just another piece of expensive furniture, useful, well-maintained, and utterly beneath his notice. But Naomi noticed everything. She noticed how Damien's jaw tightened whenever his father's name was mentioned. She noticed how his hands clenched into fists when he thought no one was looking. She noticed the way he'd started spending more and more time in his father's study late at night, long after Richard Hampton had gone to bed. Most importantly, she noticed things that others missed because they never bothered to look at the help. Like last week, when she'd been cleaning the second-floor hallway and overheard Damien on the phone with someone named Marcus. The conversation had been brief, but certain words stuck with her. "Accelerate the timeline, legal documents." And most chillingly, "He won't see it coming. Naomi!" Rosa's voice cut through her thoughts. "Where are you, Mija?" Naomi quickly slipped out from behind the chair and appeared in the doorway, dusting cloth in hand as if she'd been working the entire time. "Here, Mama. The master wants his morning coffee in the study. The good china, not the everyday cups." Naomi nodded, taking the tray from her mother's tired hands. Rosa worked 16-hour days to keep this mansion running smoothly, and at 45, the years were beginning to show. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her once straight shoulders now carried a permanent slump. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. But fairness was a luxury they couldn't afford. Naomi made her way to Richard Hampton's study, her footsteps silent on the Persian rugs. The study was her favorite room in the mansion, not because of the leather-bound books she wasn't supposed to read, but did anyway, or the oil paintings worth more than most houses, but because of the man who occupied it. Richard Hampton was 72 years old, and still sharp as a blade. Unlike his wife and son, he actually looked at people when they spoke to him. He remembered names, asked about Rosa's health, and once, when Naomi was 14 and had been caught reading one of his economics textbooks, he'd simply smiled and told her to put it back when she was finished. He was also the only person in the house who seemed to realize that Naomi had a brain. "Ah, Miss Williams," Richard said as she entered, not looking up from the financial reports spread across his massive oak desk. "Right on time, as always." Naomi set the tray down carefully, noting the documents he was reviewing. Hampton Industries quarterly reports, stock projections, board meeting minutes. Her eyes automatically scanned the numbers, a habit she'd developed after years of secretly reading anything she could get her hands on. The company was doing well. Very well. Which made Damien's recent behavior all the more puzzling. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Naomi asked, her voice soft and professional. Richard finally looked up, his steel-gray eyes studying her face. There was something different in his expression today, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "Tell me, Miss Williams, have you noticed anything unusual around the house lately?" Naomi's pulse quickened. Did he know about Damien's late-night activities? About the phone calls? About the way his son's eyes had started to hold a cold calculation that made her skin crawl? But she was just the maid's daughter. What could she possibly know that mattered? "No, sir," she replied carefully. "Everything seems normal." Richard studied her for a long moment, and Naomi had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through her polite facade. Finally, he nodded. "Of course. Thank you." As Naomi turned to leave, she caught sight of a framed photograph on Richard's desk, one she'd dusted hundreds of times but never really looked at. It showed a younger Richard with a woman who must have been his first wife, Damien's mother. They were laughing, their arms around each other, looking genuinely happy. She'd died when Damien was 12, Naomi remembered Rosa mentioning once. A car accident. Looking at the photo now, Naomi wondered what that woman would think of what her son had become. The rest of the morning passed in its usual routine. Naomi cleaned and observed, listened and learned. She watched Mrs. Hampton leave for her tennis lesson, noted the way Damien kept checking his phone with increasing agitation, and observed how the household staff moved around each other with practiced efficiency. But it was during lunch, while she was polishing the silver in the dining room, that she overheard the conversation that changed everything. "Won't wait much longer," Damien was saying into his phone, his voice low but not quite low enough. He was in the adjoining sitting room, probably thinking the heavy curtains would muffle his words. They didn't. "The old man's getting suspicious," Damien continued. "We need to move before he figures out what's happening. Marcus, I'm telling you, this is our window. If we don't act soon, we'll lose our chance entirely." Naomi's hand stilled on the silver serving spoon she'd been polishing. Her heart began to race, but she forced herself to remain perfectly still, perfectly quiet. "No, I don't care about the risks." Damien's voice grew sharper. "I've been waiting my entire life for this. He's 72 years old, for Christ's sake. How much longer am I supposed to wait? Until I'm 50? 60? I won't spend the best years of my life bowing and scraping to a man who should have retired decades ago." There was a pause, then Damien laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "You're right. After tomorrow night, it won't matter what he suspects. By the time he realizes what's happened, it'll be too late to stop it." Tomorrow night. Naomi's mind raced. What was happening tomorrow night? What was Damien planning? And more importantly, what was she going to do about it? As Damien's footsteps faded down the hallway, Naomi remained frozen in place, the silver spoon clutched in her trembling hands. She'd always known that being invisible had its advantages. It let her see and hear things that others missed. But for the first time in her life, she wished she hadn't been listening at all. Because now she knew something was coming. Something that would shatter the carefully ordered world of Hampton Manor. And she was the only one who could see it approaching. The crystal tumbler shattered against the mahogany paneling with a sound like breaking bones. Naomi froze in the hallway outside the study, her arms full of fresh linens for the guest bedrooms. Through the partially open door, she could see Damien Hampton standing in the wreckage of what had been his father's favorite whiskey glass, his chest heaving with barely contained rage. 25 years, he snarled to the empty room. 25 years of not yet, son, and when you're ready, Damien, and prove yourself first. He kicked at a shard of crystal, sending it skittering across the Persian rug. Well, I'm done proving myself to a man who'll never think I'm good enough. Naomi held her breath, pressing herself against the wall. She'd seen Damien angry before, usually at servants who moved too slowly or didn't anticipate his needs quickly enough, but this was different. This was the kind of rage that burned cold and calculated, the kind that made dangerous decisions in the dark. "Master Damien?" came a tentative voice from the foyer. "Is everything all right? I heard. Get out!" Damien roared, and Naomi heard footsteps quickly retreating. Per James, the elderly butler, probably hadn't expected that reception. Naomi waited until Damien's footsteps moved toward the liquor cabinet before slipping past the doorway, but not before she caught a glimpse of him pouring himself 3 fingers of his father's most expensive scotch, the bottle Richard saved for special occasions. The irony wasn't lost on her. Later that evening, as the household settled into its nightly routine, Naomi found herself unable to sleep. Her small bedroom in the apartment above the garage faced the main house, giving her a perfect view of the study's tall windows. She'd always been a light sleeper, a necessity when you lived in a world where making noise at the wrong time could cost your mother her job. At 11:47 p.m., a light flickered on in the study. Naomi sat up in bed, frowning. Richard Hampton was a creature of habit, lights out by 10:30, up at 6 sharp. He never worked past 10, claiming that important decisions shouldn't be made when the mind was tired. But the silhouette moving behind the curtains was too tall, too lean to be Richard. It was Damien. Over the next 3 nights, the pattern repeated. Long after his parents had gone to bed, Damien would slip into his father's study and remain there for hours. Sometimes he was alone, sometimes Naomi could make out a second figure, shorter, stockier, wearing expensive suits that screamed corporate lawyer. Marcus, she realized. The man from the phone calls. On the 4th night, Naomi made a decision that would have horrified her mother. She slipped out of the apartment and made her way across the manicured lawn to the main house, using the key Rosa had given her years ago for early morning cleaning duties. The house felt different in the dark, less like a showpiece and more like a sleeping giant that might wake at any moment. Naomi's bare feet made no sound on the marble floors as she crept toward the study, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door was closed, but warm light leaked from underneath, and she could hear voices, Damien's impatient tenor and another man's measured baritone. "Can't wait any longer," Marcus was saying. "Your father's been asking questions about the quarterly projections. If he decides to audit the books personally—" "He won't," Damien interrupted. "The old man trusts his accountants. He's gotten lazy in his dotage, too comfortable with other people handling the details. Comfortable or not, he built this empire from nothing. Don't underestimate him." There was the sound of papers rustling, then Damien's bitter laugh. "He built it, yes. And now he's going to hand it over to me, whether he wants to or not. The documents need to be perfect," Marcus warned. "One inconsistency, one signature that doesn't match exactly. I've been practicing for months." Damien cut him off. "I could forge the old man's signature in my sleep by now." Naomi's blood turned to ice. Forgery. They were talking about forging Richard's signature. "And you're absolutely certain about the legal ramifications?" Damien continued. "Once these are filed, there's no going back. The company transfers to me immediately? Completely and irrevocably. The beauty of having power of attorney documents is that they're designed to be used in exactly these circumstances, when the primary shareholder is deemed incapacitated. He's not incapacitated. He will be, once these are filed and the board reviews the medical assessments we've prepared. A man his age, showing signs of confusion, memory problems. It's really quite common. The board will have no choice but to act in the company's best interests." Naomi's hands flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. They weren't just planning to steal the company, they were going to destroy Richard's reputation in the process, make him look like a senile old man who couldn't be trusted to run his own empire. "When?" Damien asked. "Tomorrow night. I'll have the final documents ready by then. We'll need at least an hour to complete everything. There are 12 different papers that require his signature, and they all need to look authentic. Tomorrow's perfect." Father has that charity dinner with Mother. They won't be back until after midnight. Naomi's mind raced. Tomorrow was Friday, the annual Children's Hospital benefit that Richard and Elizabeth Hampton attended every year. They'd be gone for hours, leaving the house empty except for the skeleton staff. Perfect cover for a betrayal 15 years in the making. There's just one more thing, Marcus said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. What about the staff? The fewer witnesses to our being here. The help don't count, Damien said dismissively. They see what they're paid to see and nothing more. Trust me, we could rob the place blind and they'd convince themselves it was none of their business. As the men's voices moved closer to the door, Naomi realized with horror that they were finishing up for the night. In seconds they'd walk out and find her crouched in the hallway like the spy she'd become. She turned to flee, but her foot caught the edge of an antique side table. The table wobbled, and a crystal vase teetered dangerously. Naomi's hand shot out, catching the vase just as the study door began to open. In that frozen moment, with the stolen conversation echoing in her ears and her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they'd hear it, Naomi Williams realized that her life of invisibility was about to end. Tomorrow night she would have to choose between staying in the shadows and stepping into the light to save the only man who'd ever treated her like she mattered. Friday evening arrived with the kind of oppressive humidity that made even the mansion's perfectly climate-controlled air feel thick and suffocating. Naomi watched from her bedroom window as Richard and Elizabeth Hampton's Bentley disappeared down the circular driveway, their taillights swallowed by the gathering dusk. The charity dinner would keep them occupied until well past midnight. Damien had counted on it. By 9:15 p.m., the house had settled into its weekend quiet. The day's staff had gone home, leaving only James the butler and Rosa, both of whom would retire to their quarters by 10. Naomi had helped her mother finish the evening cleaning early, claiming she had a headache and wanted to sleep. Instead, she lay fully clothed on her bed, watching the study windows like a sentinel. At exactly 10:47 p.m., two figures moved across the lawn, Damien and Marcus, both dressed in dark clothing as if they were burglars in their own heist. Which, Naomi supposed, they essentially were. She waited 15 minutes after they'd entered the house before making her move. The servants' entrance led directly to the kitchen, and from there, Naomi knew every creaking floorboard to avoid, every shadow that would hide her approach. Years of invisible existence had taught her the architecture of stealth. The study door stood slightly ajar, warm golden light spilling into the hallway like a beacon. Naomi positioned herself behind the antique grandfather clock that stood sentinel beside the doorway, close enough to see everything, far enough to remain hidden in its shadow. What she saw made her stomach clench with revulsion. Damien sat at his father's desk as if he belonged there, a fountain pen, Richard's cherished Mont Blanc, a gift from his late wife, poised over an official-looking document. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his hand moving in careful, practiced strokes. "How's that look?" Damien asked, holding up the paper for Marcus to examine. The lawyer adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and studied the signature with professional scrutiny. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Your father's hand tremor from his arthritis medication is particularly well captured." Naomi's hands clenched into fists. Richard didn't have arthritis. His hands were as steady as a surgeon's. 12 more to go," Marcus said, spreading additional documents across the leather desk blotter. "Power of attorney transfers, board resolutions, stock transfers, everything we need to make this ironclad." For the next hour, Naomi watched in horrified fascination as Damien methodically forged his father's signature on document after document. Each one was a nail in Richard Hampton's coffin, a legal instrument designed to strip away everything he'd built over 5 decades of work. "This one's the big one," Marcus said, sliding a thick document toward Damien. "Complete transfer of controlling interest in Hampton Industries. Sign this, and you become majority shareholder effective immediately." Damien's hand hovered over the paper for a moment, and for just an instant, Naomi thought she saw something flicker across his face, doubt, perhaps, or a last vestige of conscience. But then his jaw hardened, and he began to write. "Richard James Hampton," he murmured as he worked, each letter a betrayal. Funny how easy it is to steal a man's entire life with just a pen and paper. Not stolen, Marcus corrected smoothly. Inherited early. Think of it as an accelerated succession plan. The sound of a car door slamming cut through the night air like a gunshot. Both men froze, Damien's pen still poised mid-signature. They're not supposed to be back for hours, Marcus whispered, his face going pale. The dinner must have ended early, Damien hissed, quickly gathering the papers. We need to. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house, followed by Richard's distinctive voice calling out. James? Is anyone still awake? Elizabeth's feeling unwell, so we left early. Naomi's heart hammered against her ribs. In seconds, Richard would come looking for his evening brandy, a ritual he never skipped when returning from social functions. He'd walk straight into this scene of betrayal, catching his son red-handed. But not if Marcus and Damien escaped first. She watched in growing panic as the two men quickly stuffed the forged documents into a leather briefcase, leaving only the legitimate papers scattered across the desk as camouflage. The back entrance? Marcus whispered urgently. We can slip out through the garden. Naomi? Are you awake, dear? Richard's voice was closer now, coming from the main hallway. Could you bring some of that ginger tea for your mother? Elizabeth's stomach is bothering her. He thought she was still in the main house. In seconds, he'd realize she wasn't and come looking, straight to the study where his son was destroying him. Damien and Marcus were already moving toward the French doors that led to the garden, briefcase in hand, when Richard's footsteps turned definitively toward the study. I'll just grab my reading glasses, Richard called out, presumably to his wife. Left them in the study earlier. The door handle began to turn. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, Naomi stepped out from behind the grandfather clock. Don't talk, she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible but sharp enough to cut through Richard's approach. He stopped dead, his hand frozen on the partially opened door. Behind the French doors, she could see Damien's face through the glass, pale, shocked, his eyes wide with the realization that someone had witnessed everything. For a heart-stopping moment, their gazes locked across the room. Then he was gone, melting into the darkness with Marcus, leaving only the night air stirring the curtains as evidence they'd ever been there. Miss Williams? Richard's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the questions underneath. What are you doing here so late? Naomi's mouth went dry. She was standing in his study at nearly midnight, clearly having witnessed something she shouldn't have seen. The smart thing would be to make an excuse, apologize, and retreat to the safety of anonymity. Instead, she looked directly into Richard Hampton's steel-gray eyes and made a choice that would change both their lives forever. We need to talk. Richard Hampton closed the study door with the careful precision of a man who just discovered his world was built on quicksand. For 30 seconds he said nothing. He simply stood with his back to the door, his shoulders rising and falling with controlled breaths while Naomi waited in the center of the room, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring. When he finally turned around, his face had aged a decade. Tell me everything, he said quietly. So she did. Naomi told him about the late-night meetings, the hushed phone conversations, the legal documents she'd glimpsed being shuffled between Damien and Marcus. She described the forgery she'd witnessed, the methodical way his son had practiced copying his signature, the cold calculation in Damien's voice as he planned to have his own father declared incompetent. With each detail, Richard seemed to shrink a little more, until the powerful billionaire who commanded boardrooms and built empires looked like nothing more than a heartbroken old man. I should have seen it coming, he whispered, sinking into the leather chair behind his desk. The questions about succession, the sudden interest in the legal structure of the company. I thought he was finally maturing, taking responsibility. He's been planning this for months, Naomi said gently. Maybe longer. This wasn't something you could have predicted. Richard's laugh was bitter. Couldn't I? His mother used to worry about this exact thing. Said I was too hard on him, that I was pushing him away instead of bringing him closer. His fingers traced the edge of a framed photo, the same one of his late wife that Naomi had noticed before. She begged me to show him more affection, more trust. I thought I was teaching him strength. Apparently, I was teaching him resentment. Mr. Hampton, Naomi began, but he held up a hand. Richard. After what you've done tonight, after what you've risked to warn me, I think we can dispense with formalities. He looked up at her with those sharp gray eyes. The question now is, what do we do about it? Naomi felt something shift in the air between them, an understanding, a recognition of equals despite the vast difference in their circumstances. We need proof, she said. Real, undeniable evidence that will hold up in court. What I witnessed tonight isn't enough, it's just my word against his. And Marcus is too smart to leave a paper trail. Richard drummed his fingers against the desk. But they'll try again. This was too carefully planned to abandon after one setback. Which means I need to keep watching. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Richard studied her face carefully. Do you understand what you're suggesting? If Damien suspects you know something, if he even thinks you're watching him, you and your mother could be in real danger. Men who are willing to destroy their own fathers won't hesitate to hurt anyone who threatens their plans. Naomi's throat felt dry, but her voice was steady. I understand. Your mother would never forgive me if something happened to you. My mother doesn't need to know. Naomi stepped closer to the desk. She's worked too hard, sacrificed too much to keep us safe here. If we lose this job because of something I did, you won't lose anything, Richard said firmly. Whatever happens, I'll make sure you and Rosa are protected. But Naomi. He paused, seeming to realize he'd used her first name for the first time. If we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. Damien can't suspect that I know, which means I have to act normal around him. Business as usual. And you? I go back to being invisible. Exactly. But now you'll be invisible with a purpose. Over the next hour, they worked out the details of their alliance. Richard would continue his normal routine, perhaps even making it easier for Damien to access the study by establishing predictable patterns. Naomi would maintain her regular cleaning schedule but position herself to observe and overhear whenever possible. There's a spare cell phone in my desk drawer, Richard said, writing down a number on a piece of paper. It's untraceable. If you see anything urgent, text me immediately. Otherwise, we'll meet here every Sunday at midnight when the house is quiet. As Naomi pocketed the phone and the paper, Richard caught her hand. I need you to understand something, he said seriously. What you're doing, what we're doing, it goes against everything I've believed about protecting the people who work for me. I've spent 40 years trying to keep my business problems separate from the people in this house. But now your business problems live in this house too. Exactly. His grip tightened slightly. If you change your mind, if this becomes too dangerous, you tell me immediately. No heroics, no trying to handle things alone. Promise me. I promise. But even as she said the words, Naomi knew they were a lie. She was already in too deep to turn back, and they both knew it. The following week, their new reality began to take shape. Richard played his part perfectly, the trusting father who noticed nothing unusual about his son's behavior. He even made a point of leaving the study unlocked more often, commenting loudly about his terrible memory for anyone within earshot. Meanwhile, Naomi refined her surveillance techniques. She learned to position dust rags and cleaning supplies in strategic locations that gave her reasons to linger near important conversations. She memorized Damien's schedule, noting when he was most likely to make phone calls or meet with suspicious visitors. But with each passing day, the danger grew. She caught Damien watching her twice, once when she was cleaning the hallway outside his room, and once when she was arranging flowers in the foyer while he talked on the phone. His eyes followed her movements with a calculating intensity that made her skin crawl. He's suspicious, she texted Richard after the second incident. The response came back immediately. Be extra careful. We're close. Close to what, she wondered. And more importantly, how much time did they have before Damien decided that the maid's daughter had seen too much? The first sign that Damien was escalating his game came on a Tuesday morning when Naomi found her mother crying in the laundry room. Mija, Rosa whispered, her weathered hands clutching a crumpled tissue. Mrs. Hampton says money is missing from her jewelry box. She thinks I took it. Naomi's blood turned to ice. How much money? $5,000. She kept it there for emergencies, and now it's gone. Rosa's voice broke. 15 years I work for this family. 15 years, and she thinks I'm a thief. But Naomi knew better. This wasn't about missing money, this was about removing obstacles. Mama, listen to me, Naomi said, kneeling beside her mother's chair. Did anyone else have access to Mrs. Hampton's room yesterday? Well, yes. Master Damien was there when I cleaned. He said he was looking for his father's cufflinks, something about a business dinner. Rosa wiped her eyes. But he would never. He would, Naomi said grimly. That evening, during one of their midnight meetings, Richard's face darkened when Naomi told him about the missing money. He's trying to remove your mother from the house, Richard said, pacing behind his desk. If Rosa is fired for theft, you'd have to leave too. No witnesses, no problems. We need to prove he took the money. It's his word against your mother's, and unfortunately, in situations like this. Richard trailed off, but they both understood. The word of the billionaire's son would carry more weight than that of the maid, regardless of Rosa's spotless 15-year record. There has to be something, Naomi insisted. He's getting sloppy, making mistakes because he's desperate. She was right. Over the next week, Damien's desperation manifested in increasingly bold moves that left traces, if you knew where to look. Naomi discovered the first piece of evidence while cleaning Damien's bathroom. His expensive Italian leather wallet lay open on the marble counter, and inside, alongside his credit cards and driver's license, were two crisp $100 bills that looked oddly familiar. She photographed them quickly with the untraceable phone Richard had given her, noting the serial numbers. Mrs. Hampton had mentioned that her missing money was in hundreds, and she'd always been particular about keeping new bills, something about them looking more respectable, for charitable donations. The second discovery came courtesy of Damien's growing paranoia about phone security. Instead of taking important calls in the study where conversations might be overheard, he'd started using the greenhouse at the far end of the garden, a glass structure filled with Elizabeth Hampton's prized orchids. What Damien didn't realize was that glass made for terrible sound insulation. The board meeting is Thursday, Naomi heard him telling Marcus during one of these garden conversations. She was crouched behind a rose trellis 20 feet away, ostensibly weeding the flower beds. After what happened with the Hampton woman's maid, we need to move fast. Once she's fired for theft, people might start asking questions about security around here. The Peterson situation is handled, Marcus replied. He won't be a problem anymore. Peterson. Naomi recognized the name. He was one of Hampton Industries' senior executives, someone Richard had mentioned as being particularly sharp and observant. If Damien was eliminating him as a problem, it could only mean one thing. What did you tell him? Damien asked. That his creative accounting for his son's college fund would become public knowledge unless he votes our way when the time comes. He's not happy about it, but he'll comply. Blackmail. They were systematically removing anyone who might question Damien's takeover. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Damien's own arrogance. During a dinner party the following Saturday, Naomi was serving wine when she overheard Damien talking to a group of his wealthy friends in the drawing room. The conversation was loud, lubricated by expensive champagne and the kind of casual cruelty that the very rich sometimes mistook for wit. You should see how easy it is to manipulate the help, Damien was saying, gesturing with his crystal goblet. Plant some money in the wrong place, make a few accusations, and suddenly you can get rid of anyone who's outlived their usefulness. They're so desperate to keep their jobs, they'll believe anything you tell them. His friends laughed, but one, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, looked less amused. That seems rather cruel, Damien. Some of these people have families. That's what makes it effective. Damien replied coldly. Fear is the most reliable motivator. My father never understood that. He actually thinks kindness and loyalty matter. But I've learned that everyone has a pressure point, and if you're willing to press hard enough. Naomi's hands shook as she poured the wine, but she managed to remain invisible, just another servant moving through the background of their lives. Later that night, she met with Richard and shared everything she'd gathered. Peterson. Richard mused, studying the photos Naomi had taken. I wondered why he'd been acting strangely lately. And these serial numbers from the bills. Elizabeth always records the numbers of large cash withdrawals. We can verify these came from her jewelry box. What about the dinner party conversation? Recorded? Richard asked hopefully. Naomi shook her head. Too risky? But I have witnesses. There were 6 people in that room who heard him admit to framing Mama. Good. That's leverage we can use if necessary. Richard leaned back in his chair. But we still need the ultimate proof, evidence of the forgery itself. Until we have that, everything else is just circumstantial. The board meeting is Thursday, Naomi said. Whatever he's planning, it's happening then. Which gives us 3 days. 3 days to catch a predator who was growing more dangerous by the hour. 3 days to save not just Richard's company, but Rose's reputation and their family's future. As Naomi slipped back through the darkened house toward her mother's apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that Damien's web of deception was closing around all of them. He'd shown tonight just how far he was willing to go to protect his plans. The question was, how far was she willing to go to stop him? Thursday morning dawned gray and oppressive, with storm clouds gathering over Hampton Manor like an omen. Naomi had barely slept, her mind racing through every possible scenario of what might unfold in the boardroom 13 floors above the city. The Hampton Industries board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., a quarterly review that typically lasted 3 hours and covered routine business matters. But today would be anything but routine. You look tired, Mija, Rosa observed as they prepared the morning coffee service together. Her mother had aged visibly over the past week, the stress of the theft accusations weighing heavily on her shoulders despite Richard's quiet assurance that the matter would be resolved soon. I didn't sleep well, Naomi replied, which was true enough. At 11 a.m., Richard left for the office in his usual black sedan, but not before catching Naomi's eye across the foyer and giving an almost imperceptible nod. Everything was in place. At 11:30 a.m., Damien emerged from his room wearing his most expensive suit, a charcoal gray Armani that had cost more than most people's cars. He looked confident, almost triumphant, as he adjusted his silver cufflinks in the hallway mirror. Big day? Naomi asked innocently as she dusted a nearby table. Damien's eyes flicked to her briefly, and for a moment, she saw something cold and calculating in their depths. You could say that. Today marks the beginning of a new era for Hampton Industries. By 1 p.m., the house felt eerily quiet. Elizabeth had gone to her weekly bridge game, the kitchen staff was preparing for the evening meal, and most of the household had settled into their afternoon routines. Only Naomi remained restless, checking her phone obsessively for any word from Richard. At 1:47 p.m., her phone buzzed. It's happening! He just walked into the boardroom with Marcus and a briefcase full of documents. Whatever you do, stay safe. At 2:15 p.m. He's making his presentation now. Concerns about my father's recent behavior and medical documentation suggesting early-stage dementia. The board looks shocked. Naomi's hands clenched around the phone. Even knowing it was coming, hearing that Damien was actually going through with destroying his father's reputation made her sick. At 2:31 p.m. He's presenting the power of attorney documents now. Marcus is vouching for their authenticity. Board members are asking questions, but they look convinced. At 2:44 p.m. Emergency vote called. They're going to declare me incompetent and transfer control to Damien within the hour. I need that evidence now. Naomi's heart pounded as she read the final message. This was it, the moment everything hung in the balance. She'd prepared for this possibility, hiding copies of all the evidence she'd gathered in a sealed envelope taped under Richard's desk drawer. Photos of the serial numbers from the stolen money, documentation of Damien's blackmail attempts, recordings of his more damning phone conversations that she'd managed to capture. But getting it to Richard in the middle of a board meeting 13 floors above the city would require something she'd never attempted before. At 2:52 p.m., Naomi called the Hampton Industries main number. "Hampton Industries, how may I help you?" came the professional voice of the receptionist. "This is Naomi Williams, calling from the Hampton residence," she said, forcing her voice to remain calm. "I have an urgent medical document that needs to be delivered to Mr. Richard Hampton immediately. He's in the board meeting on the executive floor. I'm sorry, but Mr. Hampton left strict instructions not to be disturbed during." "Ma'am," Naomi interrupted. "This is regarding the medical evaluation that's being discussed in today's meeting. Mr. Hampton specifically asked me to send this updated documentation the moment it arrived from his physician. If the board makes their decision without seeing this information." There was a pause, then "Hold please." 3 minutes that felt like hours passed before the receptionist returned. "Someone will be down to collect the documents immediately." At 3:07 p.m., a young man in a Hampton Industries uniform arrived at the mansion. Naomi handed him the envelope with shaking hands. "Express delivery to Mr. Richard Hampton in the executive boardroom," she said. "He's expecting this." At 3:19 p.m., her phone buzzed. "Got it. Perfect timing. About to turn the tables." But the next message, arriving at 3:23 p.m., sent chills down her spine. "Damien knows. He's looking at me like he knows exactly where this came from. We may have won this battle, but the war just got personal." At 4:15 p.m., both Hampton men returned to the mansion. Damien stormed through the front door first, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't acknowledge the staff's greetings, just stalked up to his room and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the crystal in the dining room. Richard followed 10 minutes later, looking exhausted but oddly satisfied. When he saw Naomi arranging flowers in the foyer, a task she'd specifically chosen so she'd be visible when he returned, he paused. "Miss Williams," he said formally, aware that other staff members were within earshot. "Could I see you in my study? There are some household matters we need to discuss." As they walked toward the study, Naomi could feel eyes on her back. From the top of the grand staircase, Damien was watching, his face pale with fury and something else, fear. "He knows it was me," she whispered to Richard as they entered the study. "Yes," Richard replied grimly, closing the door behind them. "Which means everything changes now. The board meeting is postponed pending further investigation into the document's authenticity. We've bought ourselves time, but Damien isn't going to simply retreat and regroup." "What do you think he'll do?" Richard moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening sky. "Something desperate. Something that will force our hand completely." He turned back to her, his expression grave. "I'm afraid, my dear, that we're about to discover just how far a cornered animal will go to survive." As if summoned by his words, thunder rumbled overhead, and the first drops of rain began to streak the study windows. The storm had finally arrived. The emergency board meeting was called for Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, a rescheduled session that would determine the fate of Hampton Industries and everyone connected to it. Naomi watched from her bedroom window as both Hampton men left the house that morning. Richard moved with the controlled precision of a man heading into battle, while Damien's stride held the desperate energy of someone who knew his world was crumbling but refused to surrender. Neither man had spoken to the other since Thursday's confrontation. The mansion had become a house divided, with invisible battle lines drawn through every room. At the office, Richard Hampton stood before the 12-member board with the calm authority of a man who had spent 5 decades building his empire. Behind him, a presentation screen displayed the Hampton Industries logo, but the documents spread across the mahogany conference table told a very different story. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "4 days ago, you were presented with documents suggesting that I had become mentally incompetent and should be removed from my position as CEO and chairman. Today, I'm here to show you the truth behind those documents." Damien sat at the far end of the table, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. Marcus wasn't present, His credentials as a lawyer had been suspended pending investigation into his role in the conspiracy. Let's start with this. Richard held up a legal document, one that the board recognized from Thursday's meeting. This power of attorney transfer, allegedly signed by me 3 weeks ago, granting complete control of my assets to my son. The signature appears authentic, doesn't it? Several board members nodded uncertainly. It should. It took considerable practice to perfect. Richard activated the presentation screen, which now showed a series of photographs, dozens of practice sheets, each one showing Damien's attempts to forge his father's signature, progressing from clumsy imitations to nearly perfect replicas. The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs. How did you? Damien started, half rising from his chair. Obtain evidence of your forgery? Richard's voice remained steady, but his eyes had gone cold as winter steel. The same way I obtained evidence of your blackmail attempts against board member Peterson, your theft of $5,000 from my wife's jewelry box to frame our housekeeper, and your systematic plan to have me declared mentally incompetent through falsified medical records. Each revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Board members who had known Damien since he was a child stared at him with growing horror and disbelief. These are fabrications! Damien shouted, finally finding his voice. He's paranoid, desperate to cling to power! Can't you see he's having a breakdown? Am I? Richard pressed a button on the remote, and suddenly Damien's own voice filled the boardroom, a crystal-clear recording of his conversation in the greenhouse. The board meeting is Thursday. After what happened with the Hampton woman's maid, we need to move fast. Once she's fired for theft, people might start asking questions about security around here. The color drained from Damien's face as his own words condemned him. But Richard wasn't finished. Here's my son discussing his methods for managing household staff. Another recording played, Damien's voice from the dinner party, drunk on champagne and his own perceived cleverness. You should see how easy it is to manipulate the help. Plant some money in the wrong place, make a few accusations, and suddenly you can get rid of anyone who's outlived their usefulness. The silence that followed was deafening. And finally, Richard said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, here's what my son really thinks of the company I've spent my life building. The final recording was perhaps the most damaging, Damien's bitter voice from one of his late-night phone calls with Marcus. I've been waiting my entire life for this. He's 72 years old, for Christ's sake. After tomorrow night, it won't matter what he suspects. By the time he realizes what's happened, it'll be too late to stop it. When the recording ended, the boardroom was so quiet that the sound of traffic from 13 floors below seemed deafening. You've heard the evidence, Richard said. My son attempted to steal control of this company through forgery, blackmail, and fraud. He tried to destroy the reputation of faithful employees who had served our family for years. He planned to have me declared incompetent based on fabricated medical evidence. And he very nearly succeeded. Board member Patricia Westbrook, a silver-haired woman who had known the Hampton family for 20 years, was the first to speak. Damien, she said, her voice thick with disappointment. How could you do this? To your own father? To all of us? Because he never gave me a choice. Damien exploded, finally losing the last of his composure. 30 years of being the perfect son, the dutiful heir, waiting for him to step aside and let me have what should have been mine. But it was never enough, was it, Father? I was never good enough, never smart enough, never worthy of the Hampton name. You were always worthy, Richard replied quietly. Until you chose not to be. The formal vote was swift and unanimous. Damien Hampton was immediately removed from all positions within Hampton Industries and banned from company property. His trust fund would be frozen pending criminal investigation. A full audit would be conducted to determine the extent of the damage to company operations. As security escorted Damien from the building, he turned back one final time, his eyes blazing with hatred and something else, a desperate, cornered fury that promised this wasn't over. This is all because of her, isn't it? He called out, his voice echoing in the marble lobby. The maid's daughter. She's been watching, listening, reporting back to you like some kind of spy. Richard's expression never changed, but several board members exchanged glances. Who was her? How much did the household staff know about what had transpired? As the elevator doors closed on his son's rage-filled face, Richard realized that while they had won this battle, the war was far from over. Damien now knew exactly who had brought about his downfall. And a man with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous kind of enemy. By evening, news of the corporate coup attempt had spread through financial circles like wildfire. Hampton Industries stock had dropped 15% in after-hours trading as investors grappled with the implications of such a massive breach of trust at the executive level. But in the quiet mansion that had been the stage for this family tragedy, only one question mattered: what would Damien do next? And more importantly, would Naomi be safe when he made his move? 3 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, Damien Hampton was arrested at a private airport attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country with $2 million in untraceable bearer bonds and a forged passport. Naomi watched the news coverage from the kitchen of Hampton Manor, where she was helping her mother prepare lunch. The reporter's voice was professionally neutral as she described the charges: corporate fraud, forgery, embezzlement, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. The Hampton heir faces up to 20 years in federal prison, the reporter concluded. This marks the end of one of the most shocking corporate betrayal cases in recent history. Rosa crossed herself quietly. Such a waste, she murmured in Spanish. That boy had everything, and it still wasn't enough. Some people don't know the value of what they have until it's gone, Naomi replied, turning off the television. That evening, Richard called her to his study. But this time, the conversation was different. Instead of whispered conspiracies and urgent plans, they sat across from each other like equals, the crisis that had brought them together finally resolved. The board wants to give you a reward, Richard said without preamble. They voted to offer you a substantial sum of money for your role in exposing the conspiracy. Naomi shook her head. I don't want their money. I thought you might say that. Richard opened a leather portfolio on his desk. So I have a different proposition. He slid a document across to her, not forged this time, but genuine and life-changing. Full scholarship to Columbia University, he said as her eyes widened. Business and economics double major, if that's what interests you. Your tuition, room, board, and expenses covered for 4 years. After that, if you want it, there's a guaranteed position waiting for you at Hampton Industries, not in the mailroom, but as a junior executive with a real future. Naomi's hands trembled as she read the scholarship letter. Richard, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not nearly enough. His voice was firm. Naomi, you saved my company. More than that, you saved my life from being destroyed by my own son. But beyond that, he leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. In 3 weeks of working together, you showed more business instinct, more analytical thinking, and more genuine integrity than Damien demonstrated in 25 years. You have a gift, and it would be criminal to waste it dusting furniture. What about Mama? I can't leave her here alone. Rosa's not going anywhere. In fact, Richard pulled out another document. I'm promoting your mother to head of household operations. Significant salary increase, full benefits, and her own apartment in the renovated East Wing. She's earned the recognition after 15 years of loyal service, and frankly, after what Damien put her through, it's the least I can do. Tears blurred Naomi's vision as the reality of what he was offering sank in. Not just an education, but a complete transformation of her life's trajectory. There's one more thing, Richard continued gently. I've been thinking about succession planning, the real kind, not the stolen version Damien attempted. Hampton Industries needs young talent, fresh perspectives. People who understand that business isn't just about profit, but about responsibility to the people who help you succeed. He stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the grounds where Naomi had spent her childhood invisible in the shadows. I'm 72 years old. I have maybe 10 good years left to run this company. I want to spend them training someone who truly understands what it means to build something lasting, something worthy. He turned back to her. I'm not asking you to replace the son I lost, Nothing could do that. But I am offering you the chance to become the successor I never had. The magnitude of what he was suggesting took her breath away. You want me to eventually run Hampton Industries? I want you to earn the right to run it. The scholarship, the education, the junior executive position, those are just the beginning. If you prove yourself, if you show the same wisdom and integrity you've shown these past weeks, then yes. Someday, this could all be yours to lead. For a long moment, Naomi sat in stunned silence. Outside, she could see the gardeners tending to the roses, the same roses she'd hidden behind while gathering evidence against Damien. The same garden where she'd learned that courage sometimes meant stepping out of the shadows, even when it was dangerous. What if I'm not good enough? She asked quietly. What if I don't belong in that world? You already proved you belong, Richard said simply. You saw what others missed, you acted when others would have stayed silent, and you never wavered when the stakes got high. That's not something you learn in business school, that's who you are. 6 months later, Naomi Williams walked across the Columbia University campus carrying her first semester's textbooks. She was no longer the invisible maid's daughter who dusted furniture and listened to other people's conversations. She was a scholarship student, a future business leader, and the young woman who had saved a billionaire's empire by having the courage to whisper 2 simple words at exactly the right moment. Don't talk. But more importantly, she had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is speak up when everyone expects you to stay silent. The shadows had kept her safe for 17 years, but the light, challenging as it was, held infinite possibilities. As she settled into her new life, Naomi often thought about that night in the study when everything changed. She'd stepped out of the shadows to save Richard Hampton's company, but in doing so, she'd saved herself as well. The maid's daughter was gone forever. In her place stood someone who would never again be invisible, never again be underestimated, and never again be just a footnote in someone else's story. The future, bright and full of promise, was finally her own.